And we start the day with another threat from Donald Trump, his most severe yet, against Iran. The US president has set deadlines for Tehran before and then extended them. This time, he says there will be existential consequences for Tehran if it fails to cut a deal to end the war and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Writing on social media, he said, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will." The Post went on to claim that Iran has seen complete and total regime change, and it expressed the hope that something wonderful could happen. The Post ended with the words, "God bless the great people of Iran." Demonstrating once again his mastery of the mixed message, the president's post was set against a backdrop of continuing hostilities in Iran and in the wider Middle East.
Tehran's Sharif University of Technology. Often considered the MIT of Iran, the institution was reduced to rubble after another night of US-Israeli strikes on targets across the country, including on civilian infrastructure. And as the day began in the region, Israel warned civilians in Iran to avoid using trains and frequenting railway stations for the sake of their own security. Just hours later, Israel struck a local train just northwest of Tehran, injuring at least one civilian. Meanwhile, the US reported strikes on Karg Island. The Pentagon said it hit military targets on the island, which is the main export hub for Iran's oil trade. Tehran also continued to strike military and civilian targets in Israel and the Gulf region. An Iranian missile landed outside a public bomb shelter in Israel's Ramat Hasharon, overturning a vehicle and damaging sidewalks. The Iranian military released satellite images showing damage caused by drone attacks on a US military base in Saudi Arabia and a US helicopter base in Kuwait. On the same day, the UN warned about the legal repercussions of attacking civilian infrastructure.
The Secretary General has been very clear on issues regarding international law, and he recalls that civilian infrastructure, including energy infrastructure, may not be attacked, even if specific civilian infrastructure were to qualify as a military objective. International humanitarian law would still prohibit attacks against them.
President Trump has already said he is not worried about possible war crimes. Indeed, in his latest and most extreme social media post, he openly boasts of planning the permanent eradication of, quote, "a whole civilization."
Well, Nevada Joan Lee is a policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. That's what she made of President Trump's latest threat.
I think Trump's rhetoric does not always match his actions, and the U.S. in its opening salvo basically did the most escalatory thing we could do in taking out the regime's leaders. And I think Trump can always taco. He can always walk back. He has an incredible ability to frame anything as a win at home for his base. And I hope he does with this, too. I hope his escalatory remarks in this 8 p.m. deadline is just rhetoric and not anything beyond that. But I'm not entirely sure it will be. So.
OK, you talk about Trump doing a taco. This is TACO, Trump always chickens out. Even if he didn't, let us presume that the man matches his words. If he didn't, it's hard to see how destroying an entire civilization would actually get him what he wants. If the regime remains in place, no matter how battered the country, then how does destroying everything advance this the American and Israeli war aims?
I mean, it doesn't. And I think you can see that in the popularity of this war in the U.S. Only 40% of Americans support this war. 60% are opposed to it. Pretty much everybody in the U.S. I know, at least, opposes this war, except maybe a couple people who are in the administration, a couple people in the Senate, and a couple folks who work at a few think tanks here in Washington, D.C. But the bottom line is that Americans know that this doesn't actually advance Americans' interests. It's why it's incredibly unpopular. It's why you see part of his base fracturing on it. I don't think that blowing apart an entire civilization will further the war goals, the war aims, and I don't think it'll help open the Strait of Hormuz. I think, like I said early on, we killed the regime's leader. That was basically the most escalatory move we could have made. And Trump is trying to complete these aims when he's already played one of the biggest cards that he had. So I think he's kind of floundering here, and I think you see it in the continuing unpopularity of this war at home and abroad.
So you expect when 8 o'clock Washington time approaches, you expect nothing to happen?
I mean, I don't expect nothing to happen. Trump, I have a rule of thumb: when Trump jokes about something 3 times, he tends to do it. So I imagine that we will target civilian infrastructure, civilian power grids, bridges, and the like, which, is a war crime and should be condemned by allies outside of the U.S. and by those in the U.S. who still believe in the rule of international law, like I do. But I think at the end of the day, a civilizational attack is kind of out of the realm of what would actually be politically accepted here in the U.S. And there is a chance in which, Trump, the best case scenario in my view is that he bombs a bridge and goes home and tells people that he's accomplished his goals. But I don't really know. I mean, sometimes I think that I should have gone into psychology to talk about Trump in this field just as much as international affairs.
Thanks for joining us, Nevada Joan Lee from the European Council on Foreign Relations.
Let's get some analysis now from Brian Katulis. He's a senior fellow for U.S. foreign policy at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the program. Brian, what do you make of President Trump's latest communication on Iran? He says an entire civilization may die there tonight.
It sounds like he's becoming increasingly desperate, frankly, from my vantage point, in part because Trump knows he's painted himself in a corner here. He's gotten involved in a very unpopular war in the Middle East. His political support here in the United States has plummeted as a result of it. And all of these threats, which are really hyperbolic and actually amount to threats of war crimes, reek of desperation to me, because it's not clear to me that he has any plan to open the Strait of Hormuz or to secure the nuclear material that this war was supposedly all about. So he sounds desperate to me.
We'll be talking about those war crimes in just a minute, the potential for them to be classified as such. But I wanted to ask you, first of all, President Trump's deadline for Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz is fast approaching. Do you see any chance that Iran will comply with his demand?
No chance at all. I think the remnants of the regime in Iran, first, may not be capable of making a consensus decision. Second, if it is, I think their decision and their pathway has been defiance and to try to impose as much costs on the rest of the world, on its regional neighbors, both in terms of security costs, but importantly on energy and economic costs. So I don't think there's much chance here as well, because throughout this whole episode, the Trump administration has not operated in good faith when it came to negotiations. It didn't before this war began. It used Oman, the sultanate that was mediating between Iran and Washington, as a prop, simply in a case of political theater. There wasn't genuine discussion going on in any way. It was all just sort of smoke and mirrors for what has been a military operation that has very mixed results when it comes to actually making the Iranian regime less dangerous. And in fact, it could have put into place even a harder line regime that is less predictable than the previous one.
So, assuming Iran does not give in, what do you think will happen? Could Trump extend his deadline again?
He could. I mean, I think there are two main scenarios. And we're sitting here on a Tuesday morning here in Washington, D.C., just hours before the deadline. You're probably familiar with Taco Trump. Trump always chickens out. So he's issued so many different red lines and deadlines that he's not really backed up. He could do that because he might realize that the cost of actually sending in ground troops or trying to take Karg Island, which is the choke point for Iran's energy supplies, 90% of it going through there. That's one scenario. The other scenario is that we could be on the eve of destruction, of even greater destruction. The second scenario being that he doubles down with Israel in what is a very destructive campaign and continues to strike at civilian infrastructure. We saw in the early days of the war essentially more than 100 schoolgirls killed in southern Iran, and no expression of remorse or much of an investigation about it. We could be seeing more of those scenes in a matter of hours, which I think is a dangerous scenario not only for the people of Iran, but for the broader Middle East and the world.
If neither side bends, how far could Trump go, Brian? What's the worst case scenario, in your opinion?
I mean, there's any worst case scenarios. I think it would be really foolish for him to actually send ground troops, but America seems poised to use some of the bridges that we have in Europe to send more troops and air power there. So that's one scenario. Some have discussed the possibility that Trump may be even crazy enough to use a nuclear weapon. I hope that's not the case, because that would break a taboo. But his options are quite limited. And I think the bluster in his rhetoric is more reflective of how desperate he is, and understands that more than a month into this war, actually 6 weeks, which was the outer bounds of what he initially estimated this would take, that he's painted himself into a corner, and it's had extreme costs for the United States and for his political standing in the United States.
President Trump is threatening to destroy Iran's energy infrastructure, among other things. Israel has already attacked Iranian railways and bridges today. Earlier, Sharif University in Tehran was struck. What do you make of these attacks, these threats? You raised the question of war crimes yourself earlier.
It crosses a line, all of these strikes. And in fact, the war itself, I hope historians and legal scholars look at the way we got into this war. As an American sitting here in Washington, D.C., we didn't actually have much of a debate about this. Congress has not lifted up its voice in any meaningful way. It will have a chance to in a matter of weeks, because Trump is asking for more money, reportedly $200 billion more in supplemental funding just for this war, which, if this war cost about $1 billion a day, you do the math, this could go on much longer than 4 to 6 weeks. So there's really no discussion, which I think is appalling, about the moral implications and the legal implications of the way the United States and Israel went to war, or how it's conducting this war, which increasingly is taking a toll on civilians. And when President Trump talks about taking out power plants and energy grids, which are not military sites, it's, we've crossed a point to where one is wondering who is actually upholding the standards of international law. Today, it doesn't seem like it's the United States or Israel.
Given these threats, and after pounding around for 5 weeks, do you get the U.S. and Israel, do you get the impression that the Americans and Israelis are running out of military targets in their bombing campaign?
I don't know. I mean, Israel essentially has conducted a campaign post-October 7th for more than 2.5 years in multiple countries across the Middle East. You would think that if the targets were, as General Kane, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that's the top U.S. military commander, articulated ballistic missiles and drones and things that can threaten Iran's neighbors, you would think that we might be getting close to that. But as I understand, with some of the drone manufacturing capacities that Iran has and has helped Russia with in its war against Ukraine, this could go on for quite some time, just to eliminate the basic capacities that Iran has to threaten its neighbors. So at this point, I think the real sort of danger that we have is that President Trump, going into this war, has not actually articulated a clear end goal. And at the end of the war, he actually may try to gaslight us into some sense of victory, but it could leave into place a very dangerous regime that is less predictable, with more hardliner voices. It could also produce chaos inside of Iran.
Brian, thank you very much for your insights there. That was Brian Katulis, Senior Fellow for U.S. Foreign Policy at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C.
Thank you.